The city of Nanking, now called Nanjing, was a glistening city home to China's most powerful and influential individuals. It had been the capital of China for 25 years, established in 1912 after the Kuomintang took power. Even with the state of the nation at the time, Nanking remained in relative prosperity. During the Second Sino-Japanese War, the Chinese capital remained virtually untouched by the majority of the fighting until 1937.
When the war started, we heard of the Japanese approaching Nanking, but we didn't do anything because we trusted Chiang Kai-shek. He ordered us to stay and we obeyed, assuming he would protect us. It was not until Japanese soldiers actually entered our city that we realized the danger we were in.
The Japanese were given an order by their leader, Prince Arisaka, to kill all captives. This order was executed swiftly and without mercy, and rapidly spread outside the prisoner camps. Families were quickly torn apart. Marie and Lisa lived in Nanjing with their family during the war. After the massacre, only Marie and Lisa were left alive. Go.
Hello, thanks for joining us today. I know that this is a very sensitive subject and not many people are willing to talk about it. What made you agree to doing this interview?
I have realized that I need to share my story with the world. We should never stay silent about such a terrible event just because we don't feel comfortable talking about it.
And how old were you? How old were you when the rape of Nanking started?
I was 15 and my sister was 13. We lived with one brother who was 7 years old, my father, and my mother who was pregnant.
And how did you feel when Chiang Kai-shek ordered you to remain in Nanjing?
I trusted Chiang Kai-shek, so I believed he had our best interests at heart. My sister did not agree with me, but my parents did, and so we stayed.
It was not until much later that Marie and all those that stayed realized the defenses Chiang Kai-shek had left. Only untrained auxiliary troops remained. The others had been removed to avoid a costly battle.
Once you knew the Japanese had overpowered the defenses, did you try to flee?
Well, we did, but we were forced to abandon our plans. If we didn't, we would have been caught and killed by the Japanese, or shot as we left.
And do you know anyone else who fled?
Yes, many of my friends attempted to. However, it was forbidden and those who were caught were harshly punished. I never saw them again.
Though it is sometimes referred to as the rape of Nanjing for the horrific treatment of women, all Chinese were in danger. The risk was highest for women, with as many as 80,000 women raped during the 2-year period, but men, women, and children were all tortured and killed.
The day my parents died, I remember feeling scared and confused. My father hid myself and my siblings before the Japanese entered our house. I watched as he was forced to rape my mother, then killed. My mother sobbed the entire time, and after my father's body was taken out, her belly was split, the fetus removed, and she was shot in the head.
None were spared, from the youngest child to the oldest grandmother. Fathers were forced to rape daughters, sons their mothers, brothers their sisters, just to entertain the soldiers. After a victim was raped, they would be killed to erase all traces of the soldier's crimes.
If it's okay to ask, could you tell us how this event affected you?
It's unimaginable. I never thought people could commit such an atrocity. The things these soldiers did to me are unspeakable. I watched my family and friends die. I couldn't comprehend how these soldiers could have been so cruel. Many of my friends were either raped or killed, or both. The few who survived were very lucky. It was disgusting and humiliating. To this day, I am still in disbelief.
In Nanjing, a safety zone approximately the size of Central Park was established in November 1937 by the International Committee for the Nanjing Safety Zone. The Chinese government abandoned Nanjing on December 1st, 1937. All remaining citizens were ordered to stay within the boundaries of the safety zone.
And understand you two had to go to the safety zone in Nanjing. Can you explain how this happened?
Yes, a man named John Rabe took us to the safety zone after finding us on the streets.
And how did you feel about him?
I was afraid of him when I first saw him, and we had a hard time trusting him. It was when he sent away a group of Japanese soldiers that we knew he was trying to help us. We didn't understand him, but what he did spoke volumes.
And what would you say to him if he were here?
I would thank him for all he did, saving my life and countless others.
We invited John Robert to join us for our interview.
Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
So, when did you move to Nanjing?
I moved in 1908 as part of my work with the Siemens Company.
You were one of the few liberators in this massacre. What did you do to help the victims?
I was instrumental in creating a safety zone for the Chinese citizens to go. I also helped spread awareness of this massacre, even giving tours of post-massacre Nanjing.
What made you want to help out victims like Lisa and Mary?
I found it impossible to just sit idly by while these poor victims were being tortured and raped by the Japanese, and even their families were forced to rape themselves.
And what kind of atrocities did you see during the massacre?
I saw horrible things. One time, I was walking by the Ministry of Justice, and I saw 400 or 500 people taken out, and they were just put in the back of the building. And I didn't see what happened, but I heard gunfire.
And what did you know of the others who tried to help?
There were not many. One man, John Maggie, created the refugee hospital. And then that was a place for soldiers and for victims to go and find medical help. And he also created videos and sent them to the West. And this was some of the first footage they had of this massacre. And it spawned interest in the West to help.
And were there other hospitals?
No, most of the doctors and nurses either fled or attempted to flee when the Japanese first came.
And were they successful?
No, there were corpses littered all over the city of people shot in the back as they tried to flee.
This violent frenzy died down within a few weeks. After this period, the Japanese reintroduced opium to pacify the Chinese population. The comfort woman system also developed, in which women would become prostitutes and slaves for the invading soldiers. After the war, as many as 50,000 Chinese citizens suffered from opium addiction and withdrawal. Many of the Japanese soldiers involved committed suicide because of what they had seen and done. Despite this, it still took until 1970 for the Japanese Prime Minister to issue an official apology for murders and war crimes. This divide between China and Japan exists to this day and is even found in the Japanese youth. Many do not believe it occurred and will deny the entire event. So what's your opinion of the Nanking Massacre? Do you think it ever happened?
Well, I'm not very familiar with it. They never taught it to me in schools, and it never showed up in textbooks, and no one talks about it either.
The rest of the world acknowledges that it happened. The Chinese government has imprisoned and executed several people for their crimes, and the Japanese government has publicly apologized. So why don't you think it happened?
Honestly, I think it's just a few overblown cases. I mean, the Chinese hate us, and it's all a lot of it's like propaganda, and that's common knowledge in Japan.
Well, don't you think there's a reason for that animosity?
I mean, there was a war. Isn't that reason enough?
Lisa, however, looks at the origins of the denial differently.
In some parts of Japan, it's common belief that the massacre is nothing more than a myth. Why do you think this is?
The traumatic, life-changing events that occurred in the massacre may be too shocking for some to accept as the truth. In addition, it's likely that many Japanese people didn't know of the rape of Nanjing even as it occurred, which would lead to the belief that it's a myth.
harbor any ill will towards the Japanese people?
不是，因为我知道，
No, I don't
很多
associate
人
those people with the
感
people
到
that
就是
destroyed
想
my
把
home.
那个
It is wrong to hate a group based on the actions of a few.
具体
However,
并不是
many of my
好
friends
的，
despise Japan
可是
for what
我
it did
知
not
道，
only to Nanjing, but to
也有
China
很
as
多
a
人
whole in World War
会
II.
想象的。